Jay, it's wonderful to see you. I have looked forward to this for a while. And the story is funny because you wanted to interview me about a year ago, but then you became too busy. And now I'm here interviewing you. So that's kind of fun.
I am absolutely honored to meet you. Peter, I've been looking forward to meeting you for a very long time. I've been a regular reader of your work from your days in Cochrane and on. I mean, it's an absolute honor to meet you.
Well, I have the same feeling about you, so I think it will go well today.
Okay.
So I have prepared some questions for you. And of course, the most burning question is that now that you have this, you're the director of the NIH in the USA, what are your most important priorities? How do you see you can make the health of Americans better in the best possible way?
Well, before I became director, I decided I needed a list of items. If I accomplished them, I'd consider myself a successful director. So I have 5, if you bear with me. Hopefully not too long. We can talk in some detail about some of them, but let me just say them. First, the United States has had no increase in life expectancy since 2012. It's shocking. I mean, especially for a European to hear it is shocking. Like, Europe has continued to have increases in life expectancy since then. And of course, the pandemic, there was a deep decline in life expectancy that only last year the US has come back to 2019 levels. And we have chronic disease problems that are tremendous. I mean, again, when Europeans look at the numbers, they just can't believe they're real, but they are real. They're high levels of heart disease, diabetes, cancer, obesity at incredibly high levels, and even in children. And so the NIH's mission is to support research that improves the health and longevity of the American people. And in that sense, we have not succeeded in our mission. We've had tremendous scientific advances that we've supported, but those scientific advances have not translated into meeting the health needs of the American people. So that's first. I want to align the NIH portfolio so that it does accomplish that. And that'll include basic science work as well as more applied and clinical work. But we have to meet those health needs. That's our purpose, that's our mission, and we have to do that. Second, as you know, Peter, there's a major replicability crisis in science that's been ongoing. My colleague and friend, John Ioannidis at Stanford, he's been a champion in identifying the problem. So much of the medical literature is not reliable. Drug developers tell me that when they are looking at the medical literature, they conduct their own private replication. Replication meaning, like, you have a scientific study, you don't know if it's true, so you have an independent team do the same work or look at it from a different angle or test it against other ideas and to see if it's true, if they can replicate, have the same result. Yeah. The core idea of science. Turns out large chunks of the scientific literature are not replicable. And it's mainly because science is hard, right? And we have publication criteria that make it easy to publish a study that seems to have a positive result, but it may not actually be a true positive.
Yeah.
Just because science is hard. Like, we make lots of decisions in scientific projects, and some of them may not be, when you make a slightly different decision, you get a different result. And we won't know that unless other people are looking at the same result, same project. So that I want to solve that replication problem. Scientific literature needs to be reliable in ways that it is not. When I was a medical student, I was told that by one of my favorite professors that half of the medical literature is false. Of course, the next question is, well, which half? I don't know. I don't know.
No.
So maybe in the next generation we can say only 30% of it is false. I don't know.
Yeah.
And I have ideas for how the NIH can help do that. Third, I think that we in science, biomedical science in particular, we are too timid in the range of ideas that we allow us to test and look at. If you look at, compare the ethos of Silicon Valley, you may have 50 projects funded by a researcher, 49 of them fail, and the 50th is Google. Well, that is a successful portfolio. In science, very often, in science, especially like scientific institutions that fund research, they view failed projects as a failure, rather than looking at it from a portfolio point of view. Like, imagine we have 50 projects, 49 of them fail, and the 50th solves type 1 diabetes. That would be a tremendous portfolio, right?
Yeah.
And the key problem is we punish failure too much. We say to scientists, you must be successful in every single thing you do, and scientists respond by being too timid in their ideas that they're willing to test.
Yeah.
And so I want to solve that problem. Fourth, I believe, you may disagree, I don't know, but it'd be fun to like talk about this. I believe that the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, may have been the result of scientific research itself, the lab leak hypothesis.
I came to that conclusion already in 2020, I think.
You did, okay. Well,
yeah.
Let's talk about that, because that's interesting, because especially since with the fifth goal I'll have, we'll talk about it. But I know there's scientists that disagree. I agree with you, Peter. But the thing is, whether we're right or other scientists are right, as scientists, we have an obligation to make sure that the research we conduct does not pose existential threats to mankind. So like the nuclear scientists who launched the nuclear age, the first time that Enrico Fermi did a nuclear reaction, a chain reaction in a tennis court, I think in Chicago, University of Chicago, he did a calculation estimating what's the probability that the entire world will be engulfed in this chain reaction. It came out very, very low, right? We have to have, as scientists, an ethos that we don't undertake projects that are tremendously dangerous unless the public has a say-so. And I want to, now that's not very much of science. It's a tiny, tiny portion of science. But that tiny portion, if it caused the pandemic, it's a warning shot for us to say, look, we must take our responsibility to the public more seriously.
Can I say I agree really much, virtually totally, with what you have said. And to me, it's obvious that it was a lab leak in Wuhan. And I also came to the conclusion it was manufactured there. That's far more likely than it came from nature. And yet the scientists were quick to say it's a conspiracy theory. I mean, when did a scientist ever before COVID-19 say about another scientist hypothesis, you're a conspiracy theorist? This is not scientific.
In fact, if you were saying that point of view in 2020, you were called a racist somehow, strangely, because somehow if it's a wet market in China, that's less racist than it's. Anyways, the whole thing is just. So that brings me to the fifth goal.
Yeah.
I want to restore free speech and academic freedom in science.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, not just what I faced, but so many scientists faced. This sort of pressure to align with the orthodoxy. And if you didn't, you could lose your job, you could lose your career, you could lose your reputation. It was an act of courage to stick your head up and say, oh, I don't agree. Peter, you're used to this. I know you're from your career, you've been doing this your entire career. But
my favorite tale is the emperor's new clothes, because I have so often said the emperor has no clothes, and then people scream and shout and call me dirty things, but they don't show I'm wrong.
Yeah.
And you have had the same experience. Martin Kulldorff, our joint friend, has had the same experience.
So is John Ioannidis. I mean, the scientists I most admire are willing to say I don't agree. Now that doesn't mean that we're always right when we disagree. No. But science needs people to be able to freely say, here's what I think.
Yeah.
And then we can discuss it and come up with an experiment to test it. And, if the experiment goes your way, I'll say, oh, well, Peter, you were right this time. Congratulations. And we'll move on to the next discussion. In 2022, I arranged an international meeting in Copenhagen with the director of the Center for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford, UK, Carl Hennigan. I love Carl. Yeah, he's an amazing man.
Yeah. And this meeting was lack of scientific freedom, what the causes were and what we could do about it. And John Ioannidis was one of the speakers, of course. And the institute I started 6 years ago is called the Institute of Scientific Freedom, so you like the name. But Jay, I would like to, now you have talked about these 5 main goals. They are incredibly important, and I agree. And you talked about COVID, and Martin Kulldorff in the new journal that was your brainchild, I'm told, the Journal of the Academy of Public Health, where Martin called me and asked me if I was willing to go on the editorial board, and I said, yes, that's exactly the journal we need, because when we try to publish unpopular results, we are almost banging our heads into a wall with prestigious medical journals, particularly if what we want to publish questions what they have published recently, then it gets really difficult.
Yes.
So by coincidence, Martin was the first I ever interviewed for our film and interview channel that we are now interviewing you about. And we talked a lot about COVID and everything that went wrong during COVID when we met. And Martin published in this new journal of yours, what was it, Blueprint for NIH, which I read with many good ideas. And then together with Martin, you published another article 2 years earlier, questions for a COVID-19 commission.
Yes.
And one of the authors was the now FDA commissioner, Makary.
Yes.
So what about this COVID-19 commission? Will we see one in USA?
Well, so the COVID-19 commission, the reason why I wrote that article and why it was, I believe it was important, was that so many of the policies that we adopted to address the COVID-19 pandemic were not evidence-based.
Yeah.
And the consequences for the world's population are just traumatic to think about. A tremendous number of children, less so in Denmark, because you all had a much more evidence-based policy, but many schools in the United States closed for up to a year and a half. Kids are years behind in their schooling. We adopted policies that ignored the collateral harms from the lockdowns. The early estimates were that 100 million people would face starvation around the world as a consequence of the economic dislocations.
Yeah.
The policies regarding the COVID-19 vaccine in particular, I think, were, the mandates, the denial of immunity after COVID recovery, the idea, those two particular, I think, led to a tremendous number of people to lose their jobs for reasons that had nothing to do with actual science, it felt like. I mean, it didn't link to the scientific literature, didn't support any of those things. Not the real scientific literature that was actually, that was actually addressing, with good evidence, like high quality evidence.
Yeah.
So what we need this science, I think, not because I want recriminations against people who've made mistakes. Science is filled with mistakes. That's normal in science. Mainly I want that because I want us to, when we have another crisis like this, to have learned the lessons from this last crisis.
Yes. And now you mentioned several things. I'm not too proud of my country either, because the government introduced a lot of non-evidence-based policies, and we also closed schools. And
but you opened them much faster than we did.
Well, maybe, but Sweden did better than all the rest of the countries, because they reasoned you cannot lock in a respiratory virus. It will spread everywhere, no matter what you do. Yeah. So please keep the societies open. And they didn't mandate face masks, and you couldn't see a Swede with a face mask. Why should they wear one? It's not nice to walk around like that.
Well, I followed the Cochrane review of the literature on face masks before the pandemic. There were dozens of relatively high quality randomized trials asking whether face masks of various types in various settings, some of them randomized studies, have any evidence of preventing people from getting influenza, a virus that spreads in very similar ways to COVID. And the answer was they often failed to find a positive result, or statistically significant positive result. That was the evidence before the pandemic. That's why the advice before the pandemic was, face masks are useful in hospital settings, in particular places, but not useful in a population setting. I was shocked when people just basically ignored all of this evidence, carefully compiled over 24 years, 20 plus years. And then if you questioned it, then I actually was on a panel with Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida in 2021. Martin Kulldorff was on there too, Sunetra Gupta. And the governor asked me if there was any evidence that masking children, in the United States, we recommended that children as young as 6 months get masked. 2 years get masked. And the governor asked me, is there any evidence that masking toddlers has any effect on the spread of the disease? There's not one randomized trial to date on children like that. Not one. I said that, and then the video was censored by the government. And I faced, at my own university, Stanford University, 100 of my colleagues wrote a letter, including a quote from me in that policy roundtable, essentially asking the president of the university to censor me because I told the truth about what the evidence is saying.
Yeah. I have a question about face masks, because in preparing for this meeting, I looked up the NIH website, of course, and the first thing I saw was a button called Corona. So I pressed the Corona button, and the first thing I saw about the Corona button was something about, do face masks work? And then the text said, do they protect against getting COVID-19 infection? And the text said, there was somebody from the NIH who was quoted who said, yes, absolutely. And then I thought, okay, that's your opinion, where is the evidence? And there were no references, and this is from November 2021. And there have now been published trials, as you know, also during COVID. And when I look at all these trials, my conclusion still is they don't seem to work. And why should we dress whole nations as bank robbers? Where once in a ferry, someone came to me and said, "Hi, Peter," and I said, "Well, hi, but who are you?" It was one of my PhD students, because she was dressed as a bank robber, you know. So, and there was a toddler in Taiwan who died, who was forced to wear a face mask because that was the official government policy. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you is that I know that you want to be very evidence-based, and NIH should be evidence-based. And when you have a huge institute that issues all sorts of guidance and advice, it's very difficult to ensure, how do you keep up with all that? And now that there is so much information from randomized trials also in influenza, how do you ensure such a big organization says, we can't have something from November 2021 where someone just authoritatively says, yes, absolutely it works. So have you considered, what will you do about this?
Yeah, so this is an enormous organization, $50 billion of research funds a year, of the $50 billion of funds a year, and 20,000 employees. So I'm working on like centralizing these processes. We're doing a review of these web pages to make sure that things are up to date. It's a process. I've been in the NIH director seat for about 2 months, as we're speaking. So I haven't had time to look, and it won't be, of course, me looking at all of the pages. I think it's unfortunate, actually. I think a lot of what happened during the pandemic to science is that if you ask, what is the normal sort of ethical imperative in science? It's to allow questioning. It's allow discussions. Free speech is the normal ethic in science. Yeah. The norm. A scientist is being ethical by engaging respectfully with others, sometimes with disagreement, but in ways that are structured by science. You know, data, logic, those and free speech, right? Tolerance of dissent.
Yes.
The norm in public health is the opposite. The norm in public health is unanimity of messaging. Right? So if I say to the public, as the director of the National Institute of Health, that smoking is good for you, well, I've committed a sin, because I'm misleading the public about the deep evidence that documents that smoking is terrible for you. It causes lung cancer, heart disease. There's all kinds of harm that comes from smoking. So if I were to say this thing, which I would never say in public, I mean never say even in private, I would be committing a sin, right? I've done something very wrong. It's not a violation of so when in public health, there's pressure to make sure you don't say something that other people in public health say. Unanimity of messaging, because the idea is that if people hear conflicting messages, they'll get confused. Yeah. It's the opposite of the free speech ethic and norm in science. In science, it's expected that if you disagree based on logic or data, that you say it. Yeah. The problem in the COVID pandemic was that the unity of messaging that was enforced was not based on data, was not based on logic, was not based on actual scientific processes that had reached a conclusion that was firm. It's a new pandemic. I mean, you could understand it's a new virus. It's people don't know, but in that setting, requiring unanimity of messaging was itself a sin. It's itself a wrong.
Yeah.
And it retarded the scientific process, and what's led to is now very large parts of the public don't trust scientists and they don't trust doctors.
Jay, you just said that public health messages, they are often too simple, that even when we are uncertain, administrators prefer to give an impression that we know what we are doing. And this is a disservice to the population. People are smart, and they need to know when we are uncertain, for example, whether face masks work or not, or whatever it is. So we should be more honest.
I entirely agree. I think I've been mystified by this almost my entire career, watching public health messaging. The public health, the folks who put together the messaging take it as their premise that the public is too dumb to understand. Yeah. But that's just not true, right? I mean, okay, maybe the public isn't deep into the biochemistry but they can understand nuance. Yeah. And they can understand when you say, look, we'd love to give you great advice. Here's what we think, but we don't know. I think that I remember when I was a medical student, in the United States, it's a 4-year medical school. The first 2 years are classrooms, and the third year is the first time you see a patient. And I remember putting on the white coat, and you walk into the room with the patient, and the problem is that all of that classroom work does not prepare you for seeing the patient. The patient, there's all kinds of questions they have that you do not cover in the classroom. But you put the white coat on it, and people expect you to have the answer. And so then, as a medical student, you face a moral conundrum. Do I pretend to know the answer when I don't really know it? Or do I just say, honestly, I don't know? I'll go look, I'll go read, I'll go ask my supervisor, I'll find out for you. Which do you do?
Which leads me to a question I have prepared. Now, I have studied the HPV vaccine in great detail because I am an expert witness in a lawsuit from Wisner Baum against Merck for their Gardasil vaccine. So I have read all the internal study reports, which have convinced me that yes, it is correct that these vaccines in rare cases can cause serious neurological harms. And this is what the public has claimed, but which has been denied by the authorities. So here you also have an issue that to which extent should we say that we are certain that these vaccines cannot be harmful? And then you have the Cochrane review that came out about these vaccines, where my research group with Tom Jefferson and Lars Jørgensen demonstrated that Cochrane had missed a lot of trials and about 25,000 women in their review, and the way they dealt with possible harms was stepmotherly. So we criticized the Cochrane review quite much. And in our review, which was based on clinical study reports and therefore much more reliable than basing it on published papers. So this leads me to this question for you. Cochrane has a motto called trusted evidence. This is like, oh, okay, we just need to read the abstract and we can make policy based on that. So what is your perception of this?
This makes me so sad, Peter, because as a medical student and then into my career, almost throughout my career, I've relied on Cochrane for so much of my knowledge of medicine. Cochrane has had, and I know you were in many ways responsible for this, tremendously high standards for evaluating scientific questions. With randomized trials being the sort of the high, but even within the randomized trials, you could see in Cochrane reviews that they'd read every paper. I know Tom Jefferson actually, and I know every time I see him with a big stack of papers on his desk, reading each single paper before he's willing to say anything about anything. And so you have a high standard review, a commitment to a thorough review of the literature, no matter what it finds, and thoroughly unbiased. right? Not that's the reputation of Cochrane. And so it's been heartbreaking to watch some of that commitment not sort of break down over the years. I read some of what happened with you at Cochrane, Peter, and it just made me really sad. I think the world needs something like Cochrane. The medical literature is vast. I'm not an expert in Gardasil. I'm not done the reading that you have, right? No. So, and so I'm not until I read that literature, I'm not going to like wade into it. But I really do want people who have a commitment to unbiased science, a commitment to excellent science with a high degree of high standards for what good evidence looks like, and an absolute honesty to exist. And that's what Cochrane always was to me. The world needs that. And I think in the interest of like trying to like saying that replication matters, the world needs more than one Cochrane. In fact, one of the things I would love to be able to do is to establish a Cochrane-like group inside the NIH to evaluate the medical literature in exactly with the same high standards that Cochrane has traditionally had, and then allow us to have a richer discussion about what the answer to questions that everybody so many people have about their health. A lot of the problems in medical science and actually in public health have to do with the fact that we don't hold ourselves to high enough standards for evidence. Like my favorite example of this is the public health advice about eggs. In 1968, there was an edict passed down by American Public Health that eggs were bad for you. It said, look, you should only eat, I forget the number, 1, 2, 3 eggs a week or something at most. Otherwise, you're going to get high cholesterol and die from a heart attack. But then the advice changed to, well, don't eat the yolk. The whites are okay. Maybe you can. Then it was like, okay, you can eat the whole egg, but eat more. But don't eat too many. And now it's like eggs are a superfood. I mean, it's frustrating for the public. I can understand scientific evidence emerges and you might change your conclusion. That's normal in science, of course. But why were those recommendations made with such confidence?
Yeah,
that's the question.
Could I come back to Cochrane? Because as you said, there is one Cochrane, and this is always a risk because then people might develop in an unhealthy direction, protecting guild interests, protecting their little hobby horses, protecting their financial collaboration with industry perhaps. And I have just experienced this. I made the Cochrane review on mammography screening for the first time in 2001. And back then there was a huge scandal that Cochrane denied us what was in the protocol to publish the harms of mammography screening. And therefore we went to the Lancet that published the full review. But I was only allowed to publish the benefits of mammography screening in Cochrane. And it took me 5 years of appeals to the steering group and so on before we published the harms of screening. And the first thing we know about screening for cancer is it causes harms, overdiagnosis and overtreatment, all that sort of thing. Now, I've just updated the Cochrane review because there are more deaths now, so many years later. And you won't believe this. I have updated the Cochrane review many times. They have completely rejected it because some other people feel that the Canadian studies are not so good as we think they are, the Canadian randomized trials, and they are very good. And we had other problems. We were not allowed to call overdiagnosis, which they had done in other cancer screening Cochrane reviews. So they have flatly rejected it, and we have appealed, and they rejected the appeal. So this, I believe, is starting to look like the requiem for Cochrane, because it's not the first time I have been exposed to things like that. And therefore, I am very happy to hear that the NIH might do their own systematic reviews, because as elsewhere in science, we cannot just have one, because there might be conflicts of interest. It might be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important. This is why the replication to me is a key goal of mine for the NIH.
Yes.
It's that replication that assures us that the evidence that we have is reliable, right? If multiple teams of people coming from it from different angles find the same answer,
Yeah.
you have much more confidence.
Yes.
And then you can also have competition between them so that they're like making sure that they're checking each other. And if there's conflicts of interest involved, well, I mean, the NIH doesn't have that conflict of interest. It's not funded by drug companies, right? We want to get the answer right, and I think it makes me really sad to think about Cochrane not having that sort of jettisoning that commitment it has had, because it's built up a reputation over decades of being exactly the place you can go to get unbiased answers.
Now you talk about conflicts of interest. I have protested wildly against that when I was elected for the Cochrane governing board, and I tried to change the direction of Cochrane. And one of the things I said immediately was that if you ask the general public, what do they think of the Cochrane rule that half of the authors of a Cochrane review are allowed to have financial conflicts of interest directly related to the drug that is being reviewed? They would say it can't be true, but this was the rule. And then I said, we must change this so that no one can be an author if they have these conflicts. And then I rewrote the policy in an afternoon, but lo and behold, it took Cochrane 2 years of consultation before they came up with an ingenious solution that from now on, only 1/3 of the authors were allowed to be directly conflicted. So I was quoted in England for saying, okay, it's like I'm telling, not me, but if somebody tells his wife, okay, I have improved. Before I cheated on you every second day, from now on, I'll only cheat on you every third day. So I have improved now. I mean, this is ridiculous.
I mean, I think, okay, so just step back to think about conflicts of interest. The key thing to me is transparency, right? So a scientist who's funded by industry, they might be right.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's not as if we should automatically dismiss that. But everyone has a right to know when they're reading the paper that they are funded by industry.
But are you happy for people doing systematic reviews of drugs that anybody is allowed to be conflicted?
It makes me less trust the result less, obviously, right? I mean, I'll try to evaluate it on my own with my own eyes and my own expertise, but
yes.
But I'm going to look at it differently than if there's no conflicts of interest. I think actually, you know, there's of course Carl Hennigan. We mentioned him earlier. His Center for Evidence-Based Medicine at Oxford, which is quite good, actually. I think generally. So,
yeah.
But I think the key thing here is that we need to have competition for this among and there's benefit to the public to have that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
We have to, in medicine, hold ourselves to very high standards of evidence. We're giving advice to people about the most important thing to them in their lives, their health. Yeah. And so if we don't hold ourselves to high standards for evidence and absolute honesty about when we know things and don't know things, then what are we doing? Like, why are we even in this business? And if the answer conflicts with commercial interests, if the answer conflicts with egos of people, if the answer conflicts with the pre-existing orthodoxy, that's okay. That's not a bad thing, right? No. Science only evolves if you allow that evidence that's emerging to be honestly evaluated, and if it contradicts what we previously thought, we change our minds. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. We just need to be humble about when we don't have great evidence, and we think eggs are bad for you. You say that. Well, I think eggs are bad for you, but I don't have great evidence. Yeah. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Here's what I'd love to learn.
I have one very burning issue I would like to take up with you. The reason I'm in Washington, D.C. now with my filmmaker is that I was invited to give a talk in Capitol about veterans and about depression drugs, because when suicide prevention programs were introduced, not only in America, not only for veterans, but in other countries, these suicide prevention programs involved being treated with antidepressants. And since we know from randomized trials that they double suicides, it's a very bad decision. And what we have seen is that after this was introduced in the States, suicides among veterans, they have doubled over a period of time, just as expected from the randomized trials. So I was invited to talk about that at Capitol, and I have a lot of respect for these veterans, what they have been through and struggle with when they come home. That's very difficult for them. So we need a completely different approach. One of my daughters and I have shown that psychotherapy can halve the risk of a new suicide attempt if you are admitted after a suicide attempt. So they should get psychotherapy, then we can reduce suicides, but they get drugs that increase suicide. And I have noticed that all suicides experts that I have looked up, and when they have consensus reports and committees, they all recommend drugs that double suicides. It makes absolutely no sense. And I published a paper not very long ago. Bob Kennedy actually mentioned my research during the hearings before he became Secretary of Health. He mentioned my research that our drugs are the third leading cause of death. He mentioned that in the Senate. I have now data that shows that our prescription drugs are the leading cause of death, ahead of cancer and heart disease. So we use drugs far, far, far too much. So to me, this is the worst healthcare problem we have. We need to use drugs far less, and the FDA needs to approve far less drugs. They are too little concerned about harms, and of course Makary, the new commissioner, is aware of this. Bob Kennedy is aware of this, and he has a particular interest in psychiatric drugs that he knows are actually not very good. So over to you. What is your view on that? Can you contribute to this?
Sure.
Jay?
So, well, I mean, actually, this is not scientific, but it's just factual. So I interviewed a woman named Kim Witzak, who's been talking.
One of my good friends.
Oh, she is? Okay. She told me this heartbreaking story about her husband, who was a happy, well-adjusted person, but he'd entered a period of his life based on some events where he was a little bit sad and depressed.
No, he wasn't depressed. He was just stressed.
Just stressed.
He got a new job. He was stressed and had difficulty sleeping.
Right.
And then he gets a depression drug.
Right. He goes to the doctor. The doctor gives him an antidepressant, and then Kim finds him at home having killed himself.
Yeah, someone finds him. She was traveling, yeah.
She was traveling. She came back and he had killed himself.
She hanged himself in the garage. And he suffered from horrible side effects from the drug before he killed himself. And this is the sad thing, that people think, now I have become insane. They don't think it might be the pills. Yeah. And then they kill themselves.
I mean, it's and of course there's the literature that you identify, especially for, I know for adolescents put on these drugs, it raises suicidality and completed suicides. At the same time, there are patients who benefit from the drug, right? So what you have is a situation where there's a denial of the basic facts of the harms, while adoption of the drug at the scale, in part because it's easier to give a drug to somebody than it is to do psychotherapy. I think it's a tragic situation, and I think as a general matter, I agree with you that about this over medicalization, right? The question to me with drugs is always a trade-off. It's always, I have some anticipated benefit, and there may be some potential harms. And is it for you, when I recommend that you take something, are the benefits much more likely than the harms?
I can actually answer that, because the psychiatrist's own randomized trials have shown that the benefit of antidepressants for depression is so small that it is far below the minimum effect that has any clinical relevance for the patients. So you can actually conclude that on average the drugs don't work, but they certainly have harms. But I mean, it's insane to give them to people who are at risk of suicide. And if we leave the antidepressants, if my research is trustworthy, which I think it is, it usually is, then our drugs are the leading cause of death.
Yeah.
This means this is a public health emergency situation for me.
I agree with that. Well, I mean, the NIH does research. The CDC, the FDA approves drugs for marketing, and the CDC makes recommendations about the drugs. So just there's a pipeline here. I'd be responsible for the evidence, a generation of the evidence.
Yeah.
But I think I remember when I was younger, there was a movement in the early 2000s about medical errors. And there was a considerable amount of data, information collected about the impact of medical errors on patient outcomes. And I remember the reaction of much of the medical community saying, "Oh, no, how could there be errors? There's no errors. We're very careful." I think that for medicine, people go into medicine because they want to think that they want to do good. And they're faced with problems. It's like this is almost like moral imperative to do something even when the evidence is weak. And I don't know for certain. I entirely agree that is the number one. I have to read your work, which I haven't read in detail yet, Peter. But I'll say that it wouldn't surprise me that medical errors, and that includes inappropriate medicalization of people, it is a major cause of death, right? I think the thing we have to do in medicine is we have to make sure that when we make the recommendation that the expected benefit is much higher than the expected harm, and then we have to be very careful because there's a distribution of effects. The mean doesn't tell you everything, and so medicine is about making sure that for the patient you're talking to, the patient isn't a person in the randomized trial. They may be relative to people that were enrolled in the trial may be very different. So this is the art of medicine, that you tailor the recommendation you make to the specific patient with the scientific literature behind you, but with the understanding that the patient may be different than the people that are represented in the scientific literature. And then being very, very careful to make sure that if there is evidence of harm, to like withdraw the recommendation very quickly. It's always going to be art is, I think, is the right word. There's always going to be some play between the doctor and the patient to understand, because it's applied science in a sense, right? If a doctor is doing a good job, they're informed by the science, but then they're applying it to a particular patient, and they're trying to understand where in the distribution they fall.
Yeah. Maybe
the benefits are high for this one patient, but the benefits are low for another patient, and the mean doesn't tell you. In a population representative study, you have the population. The mean is that the person is half male and half female, even though half of them are female and half of them are female, right?
But doctors overestimate their capacity for making individualized decisions with the concrete patient. Yes. They should listen more to the randomized trials. And I can give you one example. My thesis was about NSAIDs, these arthritis drugs that work on pain. And one of the big killers is arthritis drugs like naproxen and ibuprofen that you can buy over the counter. Yeah. And the literature shows that the vast majority of these patients who get these drugs shouldn't have a prescription for them, because in many cases they have pain somewhere. It can even just be a headache, and then or backache, and then the doctor says, "Oh yeah, you will get paracetamol, which you call acetaminophen, Tylenol over here, and then also ibuprofen." And then the science shows that they don't get more pain relief by adding a dangerous drug on top of Tylenol, and yet this is standard practice.
Tylenol itself, even alone, is probably the most dangerous over-the-counter drug, right? Because it's very the therapeutic dose to an overdose is very, very low. You can get liver toxicities very easily. I think we do use drugs too quickly. I mean, you can understand why, Peter. You're a doctor, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it provides an answer for patients.
Oh yeah.
The literature is often polluted by the fact that the people that are assessing the drugs have conflicts of interest about the drugs. It's who runs the randomized trials for drugs most often. It was the drug companies themselves that run, right? The role of the regulators, like the FDA and Makary, my friend who's the FDA commissioner, that's his job, is to make sure that those trials are not biased, even though they're funded by and it's a very hard job.
Yeah.
And so what you end up with is a situation where, just like we can't trust the scientific literature, you know, a large fraction of it is probably wrong, even just innocently wrong, because science is hard. Much of the knowledge that we have about drugs is that there are these conflicts of interest that play a role, and we end up with underplaying of the harms and an overplaying of the benefits. It's routine to find that the randomized trial evidence, when people start using the drug in the real world, the treatment effect estimates, the estimates of the efficacy of the drug are often less than you see in the randomized trial.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is a big job. I've been in the job for about 2 months, and I feel the weight of responsibility, because there's so much of the biomedical research of the world is sponsored by the NIH, and there are problems. But I think that if I can achieve the vision that I put forward, the replicability, focus on real health problems, allowing scientists, especially young scientists, to take risks with their ideas, so there's less, you know, harm of failure, free speech in science, and so on. The future, I think, is really bright, because what we need in science is a cultural change, a change where, rather than authority being published in a top peer-reviewed journal, that's not a marker of truth. What if we change the culture of science where the marker of truth is replication, where we talk to each other in respectful ways and learn from each other. We communicate with the public our uncertainties as well as our certainties, so that the people can make better decisions. That's my hope for the future, that after this traumatic period that we've been through the pandemic, that science can become the version of itself that it always meant to be. I mean, I have tremendous hope for science. I've devoted my life to a career in science, because I always thought that if science was done right and applied right, it really could help people. That's my hope, that it becomes that. I think it's, you know, I don't want to be too cynical. I do believe that science has helped people, but we can do much, much better, and that's what I hope for.
I'm glad that we more or less seem to know and value the same people. That also gives me hope.
Yeah, it is nice. One nice thing about the pandemic is that I've got to know, and you know, through my career, I've learned to respect some people. Many of whom I disagree with about some things, but from every one of them I've learned from. So yes. I'm grateful for that.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.